A lively corpse. This is part 20 of The Devil in the White City. In Philadelphia, on the morning of Tuesday, July 16th of 1895, the day Geyer's Toronto discoveries were reported in the nation's newspapers, the district attorney's office telephoned an urgent message to the warden at Moya Mensing Prison, instructing him to keep all the morning newspapers away from Holmes. The order came from Assistant District Attorney Thomas W. Barlow. He wanted to surprise Holmes with the news, hoping it would rattle him so thoroughly that he would confess. Barlow's orders came too late. The guard sent to intercept the morning papers found Holmes sitting at his table reading the news as calmly as if reading about the weather. In his memoir, Holmes contended that the news did shock him. His newspaper came that morning at 8:30 as it always did. He wrote, "And I had hardly opened it before I saw, in large headlines, the announcement of the finding of the children in Toronto. For the moment it seemed so impossible that I was inclined to think it one of the frequent newspaper excitements that had attended the earlier part of the case. But suddenly," he wrote, "he realized what must have happened. Minnie Williams had killed them, or had ordered them killed. Holmes knew she was an unsavory associate named Hatch. He guessed that Williams had suggested the killings and Hatch had carried them out. It was all too horrible to comprehend." I gave up trying to read the article, and saw instead the two little faces as they had looked when I hurriedly left them. Felt the innocent child's kiss so timidly given and heard again, their earnest words of farewell, and I realized that I had received another burden to carry to my grave. I think at this time I should have lost my senses utterly, had it not been hurriedly called to prepare to be taken to the district attorney's office. The morning was hot. Holmes was driven north on Broad Street to City Hall through air as sticky as taffy. In the DA's office, he was questioned by Barlow. The Philadelphia Public Ledger reported that Holmes's genius for explanation had deserted him. For 2 hours, he sat under a shower of questions and refused to talk. He was not cowed by any means, but he would give absolutely no satisfaction. Holmes wrote, "I was in no condition to bear his accusations, nor disposed to answer many of his questions." He told Barlow that Miss Williams and Hatch apparently had killed Howard as well. Holmes was driven back to Moya Mensing. He began earnestly trying to find a publisher for his memoir, hoping to get it quickly into print to help turn public opinion in his favor. If he could not exert his great powers of persuasion directly, he could at least attempt to do so indirectly. He struck a deal with a journalist named John King to arrange publication and market the book. He wrote to King, "My ideas are that you should get from the New York Herald and the Philadelphia Press all the cuts they have, and turn those we want over to the printer, to have them electroplated at his expense." In particular, he wanted a Herald picture of himself in full beard. He also wanted to have the autographs of my two names, Holmes and Mudgett, engraved and electroplated at the same time to go under the picture. He wanted this done quickly so that as soon as the manuscript was set in type, all components of the book would be in hand, ready for the presses. He offered King some marketing advice. As soon as the book is published, get it onto the Philadelphia and New York newsstands. Then get reliable canvassers who will work afternoons here in Philadelphia. Take one good street at a time. No use to do this in the forenoon when people are busy. I canvassed when a student in this way and found the method successful. Okay. Then if you have any liking for the road, go over the ground covered by the book, spending a few days in Chicago, Detroit, and Indianapolis. Give copies to the newspapers in these cities to comment upon. It will assist the sale. Okay, so this dude is running a PR campaign on his own autobiography. Aware that this letter too would be read by the authorities, Holmes used it to reinforce obliquely his claims of innocence. He urged King that when his sales effort took him to Chicago, he should go to a particular hotel, look for evidence in the register, and collect affidavits from clerks proving that Minnie Williams had stayed there with Holmes long after she was supposed to have been murdered. If she was a corpse then, Holmes wrote to King, she was a very lively corpse indeed. Okay, so he's going to put the blame on her. You guys know how to shoot U-bots? There we go. Next sub-chapter is called All the Weary Days. It was a strange moment for Geyer. He had examined every lead, checked every hotel, visited every boarding house and real estate agent, and yet now he had to begin his search anew. Where? What path was left? The weather remained stifling, as if taunting him. His instincts kept telling him that Holmes had killed Howard in Indianapolis. He returned there on July 24th and again received the assistance of Detective David Richards. But now Geyer also called in the press. The next day, every newspaper in the city reported his arrival. Dozens of people visited him at his hotel to make suggestions about where he ought to look for Howard. The number of mysterious persons who had rented houses in and about Indianapolis multiplied from day to day. Geyer wrote, he and Richards trudged through the heat from office to office, house to house, and found nothing. Days came and passed, but I continued to be as much in the dark as ever, and it began to look as though the bold but clever criminal had outwitted the detectives, and that the disappearance of Howard Peitzel would pass into history as an unsolved mystery. Meanwhile, the mystery of Holmes himself grew deeper and darker. Geyer's discovery of the girls prompted Chicago police to enter Holmes's building in Englewood. Each day they delved more deeply into the secrets of the castle, and each day turned up additional evidence that Holmes was something far worse than even Geyer's macabre, M-A-C-A-B-R-E, macabre discoveries indicated. There was speculation that during the World's Fair, he might have killed dozens of people, most of them young women. One estimate, certainly an exaggeration, put the toll at 200. To most people, it seemed impossible that Holmes could have done so much killing without detection. Geyer would have agreed, except that his own search had revealed again and again Holmes's talent for deflecting scrutiny. Chicago detectives began their exploration of the castle on the night of Friday, July the 19th. First, they made a broad survey of the building. The third floor contained small hotel rooms. The second floor had 35 rooms that were harder to classify. Some were ordinary bedrooms. Others had no windows and were fitted with doors that made the rooms airtight. One room contained a walk-in vault with iron walls. Police found a gas jet with no apparent function other than to admit gas into the vault. Its cutoff valve was located in Holmes's personal apartment. In Holmes's office, they found a bank book belonging to a woman named Lucy Burbank. It listed a balance of $23,000. The woman could not be located. The eeriest phase of the investigation began when the police, holding their flickering lanterns high, entered the hotel basement. A cavern of brick and timber measuring 50 by 165 feet. The discoveries came quickly. A vat of acid with 8 ribs and part of a skull settled at the bottom. Mounds of quicklime, a large kiln, a dissection table stained with what seemed to be blood. They found surgical tools and charred high-heeled shoes. And more bones. 18 ribs from the torso of a child, several vertebrae, a bone from a foot, 1 shoulder blade, and 1 hip socket. Articles of clothing emerged from walls and from pits of ash and quicklime, including a girl's dress and blood-stained overalls. Human hair clotted a stovepipe. The searchers unearthed 2 buried vaults full of quicklime and human remains. They theorized the remains might be last traces of 2 Texas women, Minnie and Anna Williams, whom Chicago police had only recently learned were missing. In the ash of a large stove, they found a length of a chain that the jeweler in Holmes's pharmacy recognized as part of a watch chain Holmes had given Minnie as a gift. They also found a letter Holmes had written to the pharmacist in the drugstore. "Do you ever see anything of the ghost of the Williams sisters?" Holmes wrote. "And do they trouble you much now?" The next day, the police discovered another hidden chamber, this one at the cellar's southwest corner. They were led to it by a man named Charles Chappell, alleged to have helped Holmes reduce corpses to bone. He was very cooperative, and soon the police recovered 3 fully articulated skeletons from their owners. A 4th was expected from Chicago's Hahnemann Medical College. One of the most striking discoveries came on the 2nd floor in the walk-in vault. The inside of the door showed the unmistakable imprint of a woman's bare foot. Police theorized the print had been made by a woman suffocating within. Her name, they believed, was Emily Sagrand. Chicago police telegraphed District Attorney Graham that their search of the Holmes building had uncovered the skeleton of a child. Graham ordered Geyer to Chicago to see if the remains might be those of Howard Peitzel. Geyer found the city transfixed by the revelation emerging from the castle. Press coverage had been exhaustive, taking up most of the front page of the daily newspaper. One Tribune headline had cried "Victims of a Fiend" and reported that the remains of Howard Peitzel had been found in the building. The story took up 6 of the 7 columns of the front page. Geyer met with the lead police inspector and learned that a physician who had just examined the child's skeleton had ruled it to be that of a little girl. The inspector thought he knew the girl's identity and mentioned a name, Pearl Connor. The name meant nothing to Geyer. Geyer telegraphed his disappointment to Graham, who ordered him back to Philadelphia for consultation and rest. On Wednesday evening, August the 7th, with temperatures in the 90s and train cars like ovens, Geyer set out again, this time accompanied by Fidelity's Mutual top insurance investigator, Inspector W.E. Gary. Geyer was glad for the company. They went to Chicago, then to Indiana, where they stopped in Logansport and Peru, then to Montpelier Junction, Ohio, and Adrian, Michigan. They spent days searching the records of every hotel, boarding house, and real estate office they could find. All, Geyer said, to no purpose. Although Geyer's brief rest in Philadelphia had recharged his hopes, he now found them fast dwindling away. He still believed his original instinct was correct, that Howard was in Indianapolis or somewhere nearby. He went there next, his third visit of the summer. I must confess, I returned to Indianapolis in no cheerful frame of mind, Geyer wrote. He and Inspector Gary checked into Geyer's old hotel, the Spencer House. The failure to find Howard after so much effort was frustrating and puzzling. The mystery, Geyer wrote, seemed to be impenetrable. On Thursday, August the 19th, Geyer learned that during the preceding night, Holmes's castle in Inglewood, his own dark dreamland, had burned to the ground. Front page headlines in the Chicago Tribune shouted, Holmes's den burned. Fire demolishes the place of murder and mystery. The fire department suspected arson. Police theorized that whoever set the fire wanted to destroy the secrets still embedded within. They arrested no one. Together, Detective Geyer and Inspector Gary investigated 900 leads. They expanded their search to include small towns outside Indianapolis. By Monday, Geyer wrote in a report to headquarters, "We will have searched every outlying town except Irvington, and another day we'll conclude that. After Irvington, I scarcely know where we shall go." They went to Irvington on Tuesday morning, August 27th of 1895, aboard an electric trolley, a new kind of streetcar that drew its power through a wheeled conducting apparatus on the roof called a troller. Just before the trolley reached its final stop, Geyer spotted a sign for a real estate office. He and Gary resolved to begin their search there. The proprietor was a Mr. Brown. He offered the detectives each a chair, but they remained standing. They did not think the visit would last long, and there were many other offices to touch before nightfall. Geyer opened his now soiled parcel of photographs. Brown adjusted his glasses and examined the picture of Holmes. After a long pause, he said, "I did not have the renting of the house, but I had the keys. And one day last fall, this man came into my office and in a very abrupt way said, 'I want the keys for that house.'" Geyer and Gary stood very still. Brown continued, "I remember the man very well, because I did not like his manner, and I felt that he should have had more respect for my gray hairs." The detectives looked at each other. Both sat down at the same time. "All the toil," Geyer said, "all the weary days, weeks of travel, toil and travel, in the hottest months of the year, alternating between faith and hope, and discouragement and despair, all were recompensed in that one moment when I saw the veil about to lift." At the inquest that followed, a young man named Elvit Mormon testified he had helped Holmes set up a large wood stove in his house. He recalled asking Holmes why he didn't install a gas stove instead. Holmes answered that he did not think gas was healthy for children. The owner of an Indianapolis repair shop testified that Holmes had come into his shop on October 3rd of 1894 with 2 cases of surgical instruments and asked to have them sharpened. Holmes picked them up 3 days later. Detective Geyer testified how during his search of the house, he had opened the base of a chimney flue that extended from roof to cellar. While sifting the accumulated ash through a fly screen, he found human's teeth and a fragment of jaw. He also retrieved a large charred mass, which upon being cut disclosed a portion of the stomach, liver, and spleen baked quite hard. The organs had been packed too tightly into the chimney and thus never burned. And of course, Mrs. Peitzel was summoned. She identified Howard's overcoat and his scarf pin and a croquet needle that belonged to Alice. Finally, the coroner showed her a toy that Geyer himself had found in the house. It consisted of a Tin Man mounted on a spinning top. She recognized it. How could she not? It was Howard's most important possession. Mrs. Peitzel herself had put it in the children's trunk just before she sent them off with Holmes. His father had bought it for him at the Chicago World's Fair. Next subchapter is called Malice Afterthought. Let me get comfortable. Here we go. Malice Afterthought. On September 12th of 1895, a Philadelphia grand jury voted to indict Holmes for the murder of Benjamin Peitzel. Only 2 witnesses presented evidence. L. G. Faust, president of Fidelity Mutual Life, and Detective Frank Geyer. Holmes stuck to his claim that Minnie Williams and the mysterious Hatch had killed the children. Grand juries in Indianapolis and Toronto found this unconvincing. Indianapolis indicted Holmes for the murder of Howard Peitzel. Toronto for the murders of Alice and Nellie. If Philadelphia failed to convict him, there would be 2 more chances. If the city succeeded, the other indictments would be moot, for given the nature of the Peitzel murder, a conviction in Philadelphia would bring a death sentence. Holmes's memoir reached newsstands. In its final pages, he stated, "In conclusion, I wish to say that I am but a very ordinary man, even below average in physical strength and mental ability, and to have planned and executed the stupendous amount of wrongdoing that has been attributed to me would have been wholly beyond my power." He asked the public to suspend judgment while he worked to disprove the charges against him, a task which I feel able to satisfactorily and expeditiously accomplish. And here I cannot say, finish. It is not the end. For besides doing this, there is also the work of bringing to justice those for whose wrongdoings I am today suffering. And this not to prolong or save my own life, for since the day I heard of the Toronto horror, I have not cared to live, but that to those who have looked up to and honored me in the past, it shall not in the future be said that I suffered the ignominious death of a murderer. The thing editors cannot understand was how Holmes had been able to escape serious investigations by the Chicago police. The Chicago Inter-Ocean said, "It is humiliating to think that had it not been for the exertions of the insurance companies, which Holmes swindled or attempted to swindle, he might yet be at large, preying upon society. So well did he cover up the traces of his crime." Chicago's feeling of humiliation was not surprising. The New York Times, it said, "Anyone familiar with the saga must be amazed at the failure of the municipal police department, and the local prosecuting officers not only to prevent those awful crimes, but even to procure any knowledge of them." One of the most surprising and perhaps dismaying revelations was that Chicago's chief of police, in his prior legal career, had represented Holmes in a dozen routine commercial lawsuits. The Chicago Times-Herald took the broad view and said of Holmes, "He is a prodigy of wickedness, a human demon, a being so unthinkable that no novelist would dare to invent such a character. The story, too, tends to illustrate the end of the century." We are now on to the epilogue. It is called The Last Crossing, and it shows a statue of the Republic after the Paris-style fire of 1894. The Last Crossing, subchapter The Fair. The fair had a powerful and lasting impact on the nation's psyche, in ways both large and small. Walt Disney's father, Elias, helped build the White City. Walt's Magic Kingdom may well be a descendant. Certainly, the fair made a powerful impression on the Disney family. It proved such a financial boon that when the family's third son was born that year, Elias, in gratitude, wanted to name him Columbus. His wife, Flora, intervened. The baby became Roy. Walt came next. On December 5th of 1901, the writer L. Frank Baum and his artist partner, William Wallace Denslow, visited the fair. Its grandeur informed their creator of Oz. The Japanese temple of the wooded island charmed Frank Lloyd Wright and may have influenced the evolution of his prairie residential designs. The fair prompted President Harris to designate October 12th a national holiday. Columbus Day, which today serves to anchor a few thousand parades in a 3-day weekend. Every carnival since 1893 has included a midway and a Ferris wheel, and every grocery store contains products born at the exposition. Shredded wheat did survive. Every house has scores of incandescent bulbs powered by alternating current, both of which first proved themselves worthy of large-scale use at the fair. And nearly every town of any size has its little bit of ancient Rome. Some beloved and becolumned bank, library, or post office, covered with graffiti perhaps, or even an ill-conceived coat of paint, but underneath it all, the glow of the White City persists. Even the Lincoln Memorial in Washington can trace its heritage to the fair. The fair's greatest impact lay in how it changed the way Americans perceived their cities and their architects. It primed the whole of America, not just a few rich architectural patrons, to think of cities in a way they never had before. Elihu Root said the fair led our people out of the wilderness of the commonplace to the new ideas of architectural beauty and nobility. Henry Demarest Lloyd saw it as revealing to the great mass of Americans possibilities of societal beauty, utility, and harmony of which they had not been able to dream. No such vision could otherwise have entered into the prosaic drudgery of their lives, and it will be felt in their development into the third and fourth generation. The fair taught men and women steeped only in the necessary to see that cities did not have to be dark, soiled, and unsafe bastions of the strictly pragmatic. They could also be beautiful. William Stead recognized the power of the fair immediately. The vision of the White City and its profound contrast to the Black City drove him to write If Christ Came to Chicago, a book often credited with launching the City Beautiful movement. City Beautiful movement, okay. Which sought to elevate American cities to the level of great cities of Europe. Like Stead, civic authorities throughout the world saw the fair as a model of what to strive for. They asked Burnham to apply the same citywide thinking that had gone into the White City to their own cities. He became a pioneer in modern urban planning. He created citywide plans for Cleveland, San Francisco, and Manila, and led the turn-of-the-century effort to resuscitate and expand Ellenfont's vision of Washington, D.C. In each case, he worked without a fee. While helping design the new Washington plan, Burnham persuaded the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Alexander Cassatt to remove his freight tracks and depot from the center of the Federal Mall, thus creating the unobstructed green that extends today from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial. Other cities came to Daniel Burnham for citywide plans, among them Fort Worth, Atlantic City, and St. Louis. But he turned them down to concentrate on his last plan. For the city of Chicago, over the years, many aspects of his Chicago plan were adopted. Among them, the creation of the city's lovely ribbon of lakefront parks and Michigan Avenue's magnificent mile. One portion of the lakefront, named Burnham Park in his honor, contains Soldier Field and the Field of Museums, which he designed. The park runs south in a narrow green border along the lakeshore, all the way to Jackson Park, where the fair's Palace of Fine Arts, transformed into a permanent structure, now houses the Museum of Science and Industry. It looks out over the lagoons and the wooded island, now a wild and tangled place that perhaps would make Olmsted smile. Though no doubt he would find features to criticize. Early in the 20th century, the fair became a source of heated debate amongst architects. Critics claimed the fair extinguished the Chicago School of Architecture and indigenous vernacular and replaced it with a renewed devotion to obsolete classical styles. Parroted from thesis to thesis, this view first gained prominence through a curiously personal dynamic that made it difficult, and as is often the case in the cramped and stuffy rooms of academic debate, even dangerous to resist. It was Louis Sullivan who first and most loudly condemned the fair's influence on architecture, but only late in his life and long after Burnham's death. Things had not gone well for Sullivan after the fair. During the first year of the post-fair depression, the film of Adler and Sullivan received only 2 commissions. In 1895, none. In July of 1895, Adler quit the firm. Sullivan was 38 and incapable of cultivating the relationships that might have generated enough new commissions to keep him solvent. He was a loner and intellectually intolerant. Same. When a fellow architect asked Sullivan for suggestions on how to improve one of his designs, Sullivan replied, "If I told you, you wouldn't know what I was talking about." Oh, never mind. So he was just like he was insufferable, yeah. As his practice faltered, Sullivan found himself forced to leave his office in the auditorium and to sell his personal belongings. He drank heavily and took mood-altering drugs called bromides. Between 1895 and 1922, Sullivan built only 25 new structures, roughly one a year. From time to time, he came to Burnham for money. Although whether he sought outright loans or sold Burnham artwork from his personal collection is unclear. An entry in Burnham's diary for 1911 states, Louis Sullivan called to get more money of DHB. That same year, Sullivan inscribed a set of drawings. To Daniel H. Burnham, with the best wishes of his friend Louis H. Sullivan. But Sullivan laced his 1924 autobiography with hyperbolic attacks on Burnham and the fair's impact on the masses who came through its gates. The classical architecture of the White City made such a profound impression. Sullivan claimed that it doomed America to another half-century of imitation. The fair was a contagion, a virus, a form of progressive cerebral meningitis. In his view, it had fatal consequences. Thus, architecture died in the land of the free and the home of the brave, in a land declaring its fervid democracy, its inventiveness, its resourcefulness, its unique darling enterprise and progress. Sullivan's low opinion of Burnham and the fair was counterbalanced only by his own exalted view of himself and what he saw as his role in attempting to bring to architecture something fresh and distinctly American. Frank Lloyd Writing took up Sullivan's banner. Sullivan had fired him in 1893, but later Wright and Sullivan became friends. As Wright's academic star rose, so too did Sullivan's. Burnham's fell from Burnham's fell from the sky. I'm trying to see if you guys can hit me. It became de rigueur, DE space RIGUER. RIGUEUR. Say that quick. De rigueur, French. It became de rigueur amongst architects, critics, and historians to argue that Burnham, in his insecurity and slavish devotion to the classical yearnings of the Eastern architects, had indeed killed American architecture. But that view was too simplistic, as some architecture historians and critics have more recently acknowledged. The fair awakened America to beauty, and as such was a necessary passage that laid the foundation for men like Frank Lloyd Wright and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. For Burnham personally, the fair had been an unqualified triumph. It allowed him to fulfill his pledge to his parents to become the greatest architect in America, for certainly in his day he became so. During the fair, an event occurred whose significance to Burnham was missed by all but his closest friends. Both Harvard and Yale granted him honorary master's degrees in recognition of his achievement in building the fair. The ceremonies occurred on the same day. He attended Harvard's. For him, the awards were a form of redemption. His past failure to gain admission to both universities, the denial of his right beginning, had haunted him throughout his life. Even years after receiving the awards, as he lobbied Harvard to grant provisional admission to his son, Daniel, whose own performance on the entry exam was far from stellar, Burnham wrote, "He needs to know that he is a winner, and as soon as he does, he will show his real quality. And as I have been able to do, it is the keenest regret of my life that someone did not follow me up at Cambridge and let the authorities know what I could do." Burnham had shown them himself. In Chicago, throughout the hardest sort of work, he bristled at the persistent belief that John Root deserved most of the credit from the beauty of the fair. What was done up to the time of his death was the faintest suggestion of the plan, he said. The impression concerning his part had been gradually built up by a few people, close friends of his, and mostly women, who naturally, after the fair proved beautiful, desired to more broadly identify his memory with it. Oh, those women. Root's death had crushed Burnham, but it had also freed him to become a broader and better architect. It was questioned by many if the loss of Mr. Root was not irreparable, wrote James Ellsworth in a letter to Burnham's biographer, Charles Moore. Ellsworth concluded that Root's death brought out qualities in Mr. Burnham which might not have developed, as early anyways, had Mr. Root lived. The common perception had always been that Burnham managed the business side of the firm while Root did all the designs. Burnham did seem to lean more or less on Root's artistic abilities, Ellsworth said, but added that after Root's death, one would never realize anything of this kind, or even know from his actions that he ever possessed a partner, or did not always command in both directions. In 1901, Burnham built the Fuller Building at the triangular intersection of 23rd and Broadway in New York. But neighborhood residents found an uncanny resemblance to a common domestic tool and called it the Flatiron Building. Burnham and his firm went on to build scores of other structures, among them the Gimbel's department store in New York, Feline's in Boston, and the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California. Of the 27 buildings he and John Root built in Chicago's Loop, only 3 remain today. Among them, the Rookery, its top-floor library, much as it was during the magical meeting, in February of 1891, and the Reliance Building, beautifully transformed into the Hotel Burnham. Its restaurant is called the Atwood, after Charles Atwood, who replaced Root as Burnham's chief designer. Burnham became an early environmentalist. Up to our time, he said, strict economy and the use of natural resources had not been practiced, but it must be henceforth unless we are immoral enough to impair conditions in which our children are to live. He had great, if misplaced, faith in the automobile. The passing of the horse would end a plague of barbarism, he said. When this change comes, a real step in civilization will have been taken. With no smoke, no gases, no litter of horses, your air and streets will be clean and pure. This means, does it not, that the health and spirits of men will be better? ? On the winter night in Evanston, he and his wife went sleigh riding with Mr. and Mrs. Frank Lloyd Wright. Burnham became an avid player of bridge, though he was known widely for being utterly inept at the game. He had promised his wife that after the exposition, the pace of his work would ease, but this did not happen. He told Margaret, I thought the fair was an intense life, but I find the pressing forward of all these important interests gives me quite as full a day, week, or year. Burnham's health began to decline early in the 20th century, when he was in his 50s. He developed colitis, and in 1909 learned he had diabetes. Both conditions forced him to adopt a more healthier diet. His diabetes damaged his circulatory system and fostered a foot injection that bedeviled him for the rest of his life. As the years passed, he revealed an interest in the supernatural. One night in San Francisco, in a bungalow he had built at the fog-licked summit of Twin Peaks, his planning shanty, he told a friend, if I were able to take the time, I believe that I could prove the continuation of life beyond the grave. Reasoning from the necessity, philosophically speaking, of a belief in an absolute and universal power. Let me read that again, hold on. If I were able to take the time, I believe that I could prove the continuation of life beyond the grave. Reasoning from the necessity, philosophically speaking, of a belief in an absolute and universal power. Reasoning from the necessity of a belief in an absolute and universal power. Did this dude just explain why people need God? If I were able to take the time, I believe that I could prove the continuation of life beyond the grave. Reasoning from the necessity of a belief in an absolute and universal power, philosophically speaking. Wow, whoa, dude. I'm going to make a little note here. 378. 378, damn. Okay, 378, damn. The need for a God. He knew that his day was coming to an end. On July 4th of 1909, as he stood with friends on the roof of the Reliance Building looking out over the city he adored, he said, "You'll see it lovely." I never will, but it will be lovely. And then we're at, this is top 15. How long has this video gone on? 44 minutes. Okay, those will be part 20. Part 21, we have one final chapter, looks like. Yeah, we got one final chapter here. I'll make part 21 kind of the last go of things here, which will have my final thoughts with all the quotes and things that I underlined, which I think are incredibly insightful. But this will be the end of the video for now. Go ahead and watch the end of this game. Yeah, I mean, it's a story of an incredible amount of progress, even though there's an incredible amount of deep sadness and darkness in the belly of the city, right? I mean, obviously Herman Mudgett being, a serial killer and an absolute predator in the talents of civilization, that's just celebrating its big buildings and whatnot. It goes to show that no matter what's going on, there's always two sides of everything. We can always claim that there are awful things happening in the world that we're not addressing, and we can also live in reality that there are good things happening in the world, right? There's two sides to every story. But I think I don't know. My personal selfish viewpoint is, if it was anybody else's kids who were getting murdered, they would say the murders are absolutely worse. They're worse in magnitude than the grand architecture is in grandeur and goodness and celebration, right? The magnitude of that is like, great, you guys got to build some shit and bring a lot of people together, and that's great. It definitely is great. I'm not here to undermine that reality, but the magnitude of that should not outshine the reality and the darkness, the underbelly of Chicago and what was going on back then. So it's a bittersweet story, man. It's incredibly saddening because, life does go on. That's just the brutal fucking truth. Life goes on, right? But the emotional roller coaster that we go on in this life, it is unforgiving, truly unforgiving. And you look at someone like Burnham, who his life's mission was to become the best at what he did. Absolute grandeur, absolute, I don't want to say idolatry, but he wanted to be like a second coming of God. He wanted to prove why we need God. And he said if he had the time, he would have done it. And look at what he accomplished, right? That was his need. And on the other end, Herman Mudgett, or Holmes, whatever you want to call him, his thing that got his rocks off, was killing people, articulating them to the point where they were just skeletons, and selling them to doctors, and he had a whole enterprise of killing people. It's two different stories, completely from different worlds, one of celebration and ignorance and bliss and beauty and everybody coming together, and the other of absolute torture and brutality, savagery, death, a maniacal need to kill. One person's art was his architecture, and the other person's art was his way of murdering. Both artists, just in completely different walks of life. One acceptable, one unacceptable. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Until part 21.